The empty sleeping bag told Kiana Tavai everything she needed to know. Captain Voss had been gone for 6 hours in whiteout conditions, and a man who had questioned whether a Navy corpsman even belonged at mountain warfare training had maybe 12 hours left before the Sierra Nevada cold claimed him. What the search teams assembling in the operations tent did not know, what none of the Marines at Bridgeport knew, was that Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tavai had been reading sign in conditions far worse than this since she was 7 years old in the Alaskan bush. The wind screamed across the granite peaks as Kiana stood outside the search coordination tent, watching Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge brief the hasty teams. The storm had rolled in faster than anyone predicted, turning a routine cold weather training exercise into a potential tragedy. 18 hours earlier, Captain Ethan Voss had led 8 Marines into Training Area Delta for winter survival instruction. 18 hours earlier, Kiana had been the unwanted addition to the group, assigned to provide medical coverage for what Voss had called a milk run. She could still hear his voice from that morning briefing, the subtle edge of condescension when he had looked at her Navy uniform among the Marine woodland camouflage. Medical personnel will remain with the main group at all times, he had said, making it clear he considered her a liability rather than an asset. The other Marines had shifted uncomfortably, but no one had contradicted their captain. Kiana had said nothing then. She had learned long ago that proving herself required action, not argument. Her father had taught her then the forests outside Fairbanks, where she had spent her childhood following him on search and rescue missions. Thomas Tavai had been a wilderness guide and volunteer SAR coordinator, and he had trained his daughter the way his Samoan grandfather and Alaskan Athabasca mentors had trained him. Read the land, he would say. Everything tells a story if you know the language. The morning exercise had started smoothly enough. Captain Voss demonstrated shelter construction techniques while the November sun struggled to penetrate the high-altitude haze. Kiana had stayed quiet, observing, noticing small things. The way Voss kept checking his compass more than necessary. The slight tremor in his hands when the group discussed avalanche terrain. The too careful way he maintained distance from Lance Corporal Chun, who had asked about Afghanistan. Then the weather changed. The meteorological forecast had predicted clear skies, but mountains made their own weather. By 1300 hours, the temperature had dropped 15 degrees and the first snow began falling. By 1400, visibility was less than 50 feet. Voss had made the call to return to base camp, a solid decision that should have been straightforward. But somewhere in the whiteout, the captain had disappeared. The official story was that Voss had dropped back to check on 2 struggling Marines who had fallen behind. When the main group reached the rally point at 1600 hours, those 2 Marines were there. Captain Voss was not. The Marines had immediately backtracked, fighting worsening conditions, calling his name into the wind. Nothing. By the time they returned to base camp at 1730, the storm had intensified into a full blizzard. Now Kiana watched Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge coordinate the search with barely concealed satisfaction. The gunny was 42, a lifer who had spent 23 years earning his place at the Mountain Warfare Training Center. Word around base was that he had expected to be promoted to captain and given command of the training detachment. Instead, that position had gone to Ethan Voss, a rising star infantry officer with combat experience but limited mountain expertise. We will establish a search perimeter based on last known position, Breckenridge announced to the assembled teams. Standard circular pattern, expanding outward. First Lieutenant Okafor, you will take the north sector. Staff Sergeant Kimura, you have east. Kiana stepped forward. Gunny, I would like to volunteer for search team. Breckenridge looked at her as if she had suggested something absurd. You're a corpsman, petty officer Tavai. We need you here at base camp for medical support when we bring the captain back. I have extensive search and rescue experience in wilderness conditions, Kiana said, keeping her voice level. I grew up running SAR missions in Alaska. That is appreciated, Breckenridge said in a tone that made clear it was not appreciated at all. But we need trained mountain infantry on this search, not medical personnel wandering around getting themselves lost. You will remain at base camp. That is an order. Before we continue with the search, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar mountain rescues or winter storm situations where you live. The search teams deployed into the storm, their headlamps disappearing into the swirling snow within seconds. Kiana returned to the medical tent, ostensibly to prepare for casualties, but her mind was already tracking. She had seen the route map, had memorized the training area boundaries, had noted the terrain features. More importantly, she had observed Captain Voss all day before he vanished. First Lieutenant Nash Okafor found her 20 minutes later, stomping snow from his boots as he entered the medical tent. The young Marine officer was Nigerian-American, one of the few people at Bridgeport who had treated Kiana as an equal rather than an outsider. He looked exhausted and frustrated. "This is bad, Petty Officer Devine," he said quietly. "Visibility is near zero. Temperature is dropping to -10, and we are essentially searching blind. The handheld radios are barely working in this weather." "What was Captain Voss's state of mind before he disappeared?" Kiana asked. Okafor hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us, he seemed off today. Distracted. Kept checking areas we had already cleared, like he was expecting something. I have seen that before in guys dealing with combat stress." Kiana nodded slowly. She had seen it too, in her father's SAR work. People under psychological strain made choices that seemed irrational to others, but followed an internal logic shaped by trauma. If Voss had been experiencing a PTSD episode when the storm hit, his decisions might not match the rational navigation everyone assumed. The search teams returned at 2200 hours, defeated by the whiteout conditions. No sign of Captain Voss. No tracks, no shelter, no response to radio calls. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge called off the search until dawn, his expression grim, but his eyes holding something else. Something that looked almost like vindication. Colonel Rita Blackwood, the base commander, arrived from the main installation just after midnight. She was a sharp-eyed officer in her 50s who had commanded at Bridgeport for 2 years. Her presence meant this situation had escalated beyond a training accident into a potential crisis. "Give me the tactical picture," she ordered Breckenridge. The gunny laid out the search parameters on the map. "We have covered a 3-kilometer radius from last known position with no contact. Weather has prevented effective searching. Captain Voss has been exposed for approximately 9 hours in near-blizzard conditions without proper cold weather gear. His chances of survival decrease significantly with each passing hour." "What are you recommending?" Blackwood asked. Breckenridge paused just long enough to be noticeable. "We continue at first light, ma'am, but I need to be realistic about probable outcomes. If Captain Voss is not in immediate shelter, he is likely already hypothermic. Without knowing his direction of travel, we could search for days." Kiana stood in the back of the operations tent, watching this exchange. She saw the colonel's face harden, saw Breckenridge's carefully neutral expression, saw the other Marines processing the implication that their captain might already be dead. But Kiana did not believe that. Not yet, because she had seen something that afternoon that no one else had noticed, a small detail that meant nothing at the time, but suddenly felt significant. When the group had stopped for the last break before the storm hit, Captain Voss had spent several minutes staring southwest toward Deadfall Canyon. That area was not part of their training route, was in fact marked as hazardous terrain to avoid. But Voss had stared at it with an intensity that suggested recognition rather than casual observation. If he had become disoriented in the storm, if his mind had pulled him towards something familiar from his past, he might have gone in the exact opposite direction from where everyone was searching. Kiana waited until the command meeting ended, until the exhausted search teams had been dismissed to get a few hours of rest before the dawn search resumed. Then she found Lieutenant Okafor outside the operations tent. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "I do not think Captain Voss went north. I think he went southwest toward Deadfall Canyon." Okafor stared at her. "That does not make any sense. That terrain is incredibly dangerous, and it was not part of our route." "I know," Kiana said, "but I saw him looking in that direction before the storm. And if he was having a PTSD episode, he might have been drawn towards something only he could see." "That is a hell of a theory based on him looking at a canyon," Okafor said, but his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. It is a theory based on reading behavior and knowing how disoriented people move in wilderness conditions, Kiana replied. My father taught me that lost people do not think like found people. They follow internal logic that seems random until you understand what they are seeing. The lieutenant was quiet for a long moment, snow gathering on his shoulders. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that at first light, someone should search southwest while the main teams continue their grid pattern north. Someone who knows how to track in these conditions. Breckenridge will never approve that, Okafor said. I know, Kiana replied. The implication hung between them in the freezing air. Finally, Okafor nodded once, very slightly, and walked away without another word. But Kiana saw him glance back once, and she saw the understanding in his eyes. The wind continued to howl across the mountains as Kiana returned to her quarters. Captain Ethan Voss was somewhere out there in the dark and cold, a man who had dismissed her competence now, depending on someone noticing what everyone else had missed. She began preparing her gear, moving quietly, checking her cold weather clothing and emergency supplies. By dawn, the official search would resume its methodical northern grid pattern. But Kiana Tavai would be heading southwest, orders or no orders, because she had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to prove you belonged was to do what needed doing regardless of who gave permission. Dawn came late to the High Sierra, the sun struggling to penetrate the storm clouds that still clung to the peaks. Kiana had slept for maybe 90 minutes, her mind too active with calculations of distance, terrain, and time. Captain Voss had now been missing for 14 hours. If he had found or built shelter, if he had managed to stay dry, he might still be alive. If not, hypothermia would have already begun shutting down his body systems. The operations tent buzzed with activity as search teams assembled for the morning briefing. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge stood at the map board, his expression professionally concerned, but his body language suggesting a man going through necessary motions rather than expecting success. Colonel Blackwood had returned to the main base, leaving Breckenridge in tactical command of the search operation. We expand the northern grid to 5 kilometers, Breckenridge announced. Weather Service says we have a 6-hour window before the next storm system moves in. This is our best chance to locate Captain Voss. Kiana stood near the back, her cold weather gear already on, her small pack loaded with medical supplies and emergency equipment. She had added items the official search teams would not carry because they assumed they would find Voss quickly or not at all. She had brought climbing rope, extra thermal blankets, chemical heat packs, and her father's old compass, the one he had used on 47 successful SAR missions in Alaska. First Lieutenant Okafor caught her eye across the tent and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He had positioned himself to lead the westernmost search team, the one that would come closest to where Kiana planned to begin her unauthorized search. If anyone asked, he could claim he had seen her heading out with official authorization. Petty Officer Devine, Breckenridge's voice cut through the tent. You will remain at Base Camp Medical Station. We may have injuries among the search teams, given the terrain conditions. Understood, Gunny, Kiana replied, her voice neutral. She waited until the teams deployed, watching them disappear into the morning gloom, their paths taking them north and northeast along the plan grid. Then she waited another 10 minutes, until the operations tent emptied, except for the communications specialist monitoring radio traffic. The southwestern route toward Deadfall Canyon started with a deceptively gentle slope through pine forest. Kiana moved quickly but carefully, her eyes already reading the landscape. Fresh snow had covered most tracks from yesterday, but not everything. Snow told stories if you knew how to read the layers, the way drifts formed around obstacles, the patterns of wind deposition. She was 200 meters from base camp when she found the first sign. Not a footprint, nothing that obvious. Instead, she noticed a pattern in the snow beneath a cluster of pines where the canopy had provided some protection from the worst of the storm. The snow there showed compression marks, faint depressions that could have been from wind-blown debris or could have been from someone stumbling through in poor visibility. Kiana knelt, studying the marks. She pulled off one glove despite the cold and touched the snow gently, feeling its texture and consistency. The depressions were beneath the top layer of fresh snow, meaning they had been made during the storm, not after. They were irregularly spaced, the kind of pattern made by someone moving without clear direction rather than with purposeful navigation. She pulled out her notebook and sketched the pattern, noting the compass bearing. Southwest, toward the canyon. She moved forward, scanning the ground and the vegetation. 50 meters further, she found a broken branch on a serviceberry bush, snapped at chest height. The break was fresh, the wood inside still showing lighter color, not yet weathered. Someone had pushed through here, forcing their way through brush rather than going around it. Another sign of disorientation. Kiana pulled out her radio, hesitated, then put it away. If she reported this now, Breckenridge would order her back and send his own teams. They would trample the area, destroy whatever other signs existed, and probably dismiss her findings as wishful thinking. She needed more evidence, something definitive that could not be ignored. The terrain grew rougher as she moved away from the training areas and into the wilderness zone. The morning temperature was -12°C, and the wind carried ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Kiana pulled her neck gaiter higher and kept moving, her eyes constantly scanning. 20 minutes later, she found it. A piece of fabric, no larger than her thumbnail, snagged on a sharp granite outcrop. Olive drab, the exact color of Marine Corps cold weather gear. It was caught about 5 feet off the ground, suggesting someone had squeezed between rocks, brushing against the outcrop. Kiana photographed it with her phone, then carefully extracted it and placed it in a plastic bag. This was proof. This was evidence that someone had come this way during or just after the storm. Combined with the compressed snow and the broken branch, it created a trail. But it was a trail heading directly toward some of the most dangerous terrain at Bridgeport. Deadfall Canyon got its name from the massive rock slide that had occurred there 15 years ago, creating an unstable maze of houses-eyes boulders and hidden crevasses. The official training maps marked it in red with explicit warnings. No military personnel were authorized to enter without special clearance and technical climbing equipment. If Captain Voss had gone into that canyon in a wideout, disoriented and alone, his chances of survival dropped dramatically. But it would also explain why the northern search teams had found nothing. Everyone was looking in the wrong direction. Kiana keyed her radio. Lieutenant Okafor, this is Petty Officer Tavai. Over. Static crackled for several seconds before Okafor's voice came through. Go ahead, Petty Officer. I need to report a finding, Kiana said carefully. I am approximately 1 kilometer southwest of base camp, and I have located evidence of recent passage toward Deadfall Canyon. Fabric sample consistent with marine cold weather gear, compressed snow patterns, and broken vegetation. Recommend immediate reassignment of search resources to this area. Over. The radio went silent for a long moment. Then a different voice, harsh and angry. Petty Officer Tavai, this is Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge. What is your current location, and why are you not at base camp medical as ordered? Kiana took a breath. I am following a potential track of Captain Voss heading southwest, Gunny. I have physical evidence that someone passed through this area during the storm time frame. You were ordered to remain at base camp. Breckenridge's voice was tight with anger. You are in direct violation of orders. Return to base immediately. That is a direct order. Gunny, I believe Captain Voss went into Deadfall Canyon. The evidence clearly indicates southwest movement, not north. We're searching the wrong area. Your belief is noted and dismissed, Breckenridge shot back. Deadfall Canyon is restricted terrain, and there is no logical reason the captain would have gone there. You're seeing what you want to see because you want to prove yourself. Classic mistake of inexperienced searchers. Now return to base before I have you placed on report for insubordination. Kiana stared at the radio in her hand. She could return now, present her evidence, let the proper authorities make the decision. That was the military way, the safe way, the way that kept her out of trouble. But it was also the way that would cost valuable hours while Breckenridge dismissed her findings and continued the northern search. Or she could keep going, follow the trail, find more evidence. If she was right, if she found Captain Voss, it would not matter that she had disobeyed orders. If she was wrong, her military career would likely be over. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. When you know you're right about a track, when you have read the sign and understood the story, you follow it. Politics and pride do not matter when someone's life is on the line. Gunny, I am continuing southwest to verify the track, Kiana said into the radio. I will report further findings. Tavai out. She switched off the radio before Breckenridge could respond, knowing she had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But she also knew she was right. Every instinct trained into her since childhood, every lesson learned in the Alaskan wilderness, told her that Captain Ethan Voss had come this way. The track led deeper into rough country, the terrain becoming increasingly hostile. Kiana moved carefully but quickly, documenting each sign. More compressed snow, a scuff mark on a rock, a disturbance in the frost pattern on fallen logs. Each piece was small, but together they painted a picture of someone moving through this area in conditions of poor visibility and increasing desperation. By mid-morning, she reached the edge of Deadfall Canyon. The land simply dropped away, a chaotic tumble of granite boulders and scree slopes disappearing into shadows. Even in good weather, this would be technical terrain requiring ropes and planning. In a storm, at night, it would be nearly impossible to navigate safely. But at the canyon's edge, Kiana found the clearest sign yet. A depression in the snow near a large boulder showed where someone had knelt or fallen. And beside it, pressed into the sheltered side of the rock, was a partial boot print. Military issue, size 10 or 11, with the distinctive tread pattern of Marine Corps cold weather boots. Captain Voss wore size 11 boots. Kiana had noticed during yesterday's training when they had changed into their cold weather gear. She photographed the print, measured it, documented its position. Then she looked into the canyon and felt her stomach tighten. If Voss had descended into that maze of rocks in the dark during a storm, finding him would require going down there too. And if Breckenridge sent MPs to bring her back, if they stopped the search now, Voss would die alone in that stone labyrinth. Kiana made her decision. She checked her climbing gear, secured her pack, and began working her way down into Deadfall Canyon, following a trail that everyone else insisted did not exist. Deadfall Canyon swallowed sound. The wind that howled across the peaks above became muted whispers among the massive boulders, creating an eerie acoustic landscape where Kiana's breathing seemed unnaturally loud. She moved slowly down the initial slope, testing each foothold before committing her weight, her eyes constantly scanning for both the trail and potential hazards. The canyon was a frozen maze. Houses' granite blocks lay tumbled against each other in chaotic patterns, some balanced precariously, others wedged so tightly they formed caves and tunnels through the rockfall. Snow had drifted into some gaps, while others remained bare, protected by overhanging stone. It was exactly the kind of terrain where an injured or hypothermic person could find temporary shelter, and exactly the kind of terrain where they could disappear completely. Kiana paused 30 meters down, crouching beside a flat boulder to study the area below. This was where pure tracking became as much art as science, where the absence of sign could be as meaningful as its presence. In Alaska, her father had taught her to think like the person she was tracking. Not where would I go, but where would they go given their skills, their mental state, their level of desperation. Captain Ethan Voss was a trained infantry officer with combat experience. Even disoriented, even in a PTSD episode, his muscle memory would push him toward tactical thinking. He would seek high ground for observation or low ground for shelter. He would avoid obvious danger if he retained any situational awareness. But the storm would have reduced visibility to almost nothing, forcing him to navigate by feel and instinct rather than sight. She moved laterally along the canyon wall, examining the possibilities. There, 20 meters to her left, was a natural chute between two massive rocks that would funnel someone downward. The entrance showed disturbed snow, subtle but present. Kiana approached carefully, documenting with her phone camera, as she went. Inside the chute, protected from the worst of the weather, she found it. A clear handprint pressed into snow on the rock wall, made by someone bracing themselves while descending. The print was large, made by an adult hand wearing a glove. But more telling was what the print revealed about the person who made it. The hand had been placed deliberately, fingers spread for maximum contact, showing someone who retained enough awareness to move carefully despite difficult conditions. Kiana felt a surge of hope. This print was recent, made during or shortly after the storm, and it showed purposeful movement, not the random flailing of someone completely disoriented. Voss had been functioning well enough to navigate, which meant he might have been functional enough to find or create shelter. She continued down the chute, moving with increased confidence now that she had confirmation of the trail. The narrow passage opened into a wider bowl area where several large boulders created a series of natural alcoves and overhangs. This would be a logical place to seek shelter from the storm. Kiana methodically checked each potential shelter space, looking for any sign of occupation. Most were empty, just stone and shadow and old snow. But in the fourth alcove she examined, tucked beneath an overhang that would have protected it from the worst of the wind, she found something that made her heart race. A pile of pine needles and small branches, gathered and arranged in a rough bedding pattern. The needles were still green, recently broken from trees, not old debris. Someone had collected these for insulation, for protection from the frozen ground. It was a survival technique taught in every military cold weather course. Kiana knelt beside the makeshift bedding and carefully examined it without disturbing the arrangement. The needles showed compression marks where weight had rested on them, and when she touched the rock beneath, it still held a faint trace of warmth, barely perceptible but present. Someone had been here within the last few hours, but they were not here now, which meant Voss had moved on. The question was when and why. Had he recovered enough to attempt self-rescue, or had deteriorating conditions forced him to seek better shelter? Kiana stood and looked around the alcove, trying to see what Voss would have seen when he decided to leave this spot. The answer presented itself immediately. From this alcove, looking further down the canyon, there was a clear line of sight to a more substantial rock formation perhaps 100 meters distant. Even in poor visibility, the formation would be visible as a darker mass against the snow. It was larger, more protected, a better long-term shelter option than this temporary haven. Kiana moved toward the formation, now tracking with renewed urgency. If Voss had left his first shelter to reach a second location, he might have exhausted his remaining energy in the attempt. She might find him collapsed somewhere between the 2 points, or she might find him safe in better shelter. Either way, she was close now. She could feel it. The terrain between the alcove and the larger formation was treacherous, requiring careful navigation around ice-slicked rocks and hidden gaps. Kiana moved as quickly as safety allowed, her eyes scanning constantly. She found another sign 30 meters from the alcove, a scrape on rock where someone had slipped and caught themselves. The mark was fresh, the exposed stone showing lighter color where the weather-darkened surface had been scraped away. As she approached the larger formation, Kiana noticed something that made her slow her pace. The wind patterns here created a strange acoustic effect, and she thought she heard something. Not the wind, but something else. Something rhythmic and faint. She stopped moving and held her breath, listening with complete focus. There was again a sound like breathing, but labored and rough, coming from somewhere within the rock formation ahead. Kiana's training as a corpsman immediately kicked in, warring with her training as a tracker. The tracker in her wanted to approach slowly, carefully, documenting everything. The medic in her wanted to run toward that sound, toward a patient who clearly needed help. She compromised, moving quickly but carefully, her medical pack already swinging around her front for easy access. The formation was a massive granite outcrop that had fractured during the ancient rock slide, creating a split in the stone like a partially open book. The gap between the rock faces was perhaps 4 feet wide at the base, narrowing as it rose. Inside that gap, protected from wind and snow, Kiana saw a dark shape that might have been Shadow or might have been something else. "Captain Voss," she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the rock chamber. "This is Petty Officer Tavai. Can you hear me?" The labored breathing sound stopped. Then, after several long seconds, a voice emerged from the shadows. Weak, hoarse, but unmistakably human. "Tavai?" The voice held confusion and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Kiana moved into the gap, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. As details resolved, she saw him. Captain Ethan Voss sat propped against the back wall of the natural shelter, his cold weather gear torn in several places, his face pale even in the shadows. But he was alive, conscious, and aware enough to recognize her voice. "Finding you, sir," Kiana said, already assessing his condition as she approached. "The search teams are looking in the wrong direction. I tracked you here." "You tracked me?" Voss's voice carried multiple emotions. Surprise, maybe embarrassment, definitely pain. "Through Deadfall Canyon in this weather?" "Yes, sir," Kiana said, kneeling beside him and immediately beginning her medical assessment. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, breathing, signs of frostbite or other injury. "I'm going to need you to tell me where you were hurt and how long you have been in this location." Voss's breathing was labored and his pulse was rapid, but not critically so. His hands showed early signs of frostbite, and when Kiana checked his feet, she found his left boot was wet, a dangerous situation in these temperatures. But what concerned her most was the way he held his left side, the careful, shallow breathing that suggested rib injury. "Left ribs," Voss confirmed when she asked. "Fell maybe 10 feet in the dark last night. Hit a ledge on the way down. Pretty sure at least 2 are broken." Kiana carefully examined the area, noting the swelling and discoloration visible even through his layers. Broken or severely bruised ribs, possible internal injury, early-stage frostbite, mild hypothermia, and who knew what else. He needed medical evacuation immediately, but getting him out of this canyon would be a technical challenge, even with a full rescue team. First, she needed to stabilize him and get his core temperature up. She pulled emergency heat packs from her medical bag and activated them, placing them strategically against Voss's torso and in his boots after she had carefully removed the wet one and wrapped his foot in dry, thermal material. "I'm going to radio for extraction," Kiana said, reaching for her radio. Voss's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Wait," he said. "Before you do that, I need to tell you something. About yesterday. About why I went the wrong direction." "Sir, that can wait until we get you out of here," Kiana said. "No," Voss insisted, his eyes intense despite his weakened state. "It cannot wait. Because I need you to understand. I was not just lost in the storm. I had an episode. PTSD. I thought I was back in Afghanistan, in the mountains there. When the storm hit, when visibility dropped, something in my brain switched, and I was not at Bridgeport anymore. I was back there, and I was trying to get to an extraction point from a mission 3 years ago." Kiana went still, understanding flooding through her. That explained everything. The seemingly irrational route, the movement toward dangerous terrain, the specific direction. Voss had not been navigating to safety. He had been navigating to a memory. "And you," Voss continued, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Yesterday morning, I treated you like you did not belong here. I questioned why a corpsman needed mountain training. I was an ass, and I was wrong. You just saved my life by doing exactly what I said you could not do." "Sir," Kiana said gently, "right now I just need you to stay calm and stay warm. We can discuss everything else after we get you out of this canyon." She keyed her radio. "Any station this net. This is Petty Officer Tavai. I have located Captain Voss. He is alive, but injured and requires immediate medical evacuation. Current position is Deadfall Canyon, approximately 1.5 kilometers southwest of base camp. Request emergency extraction team with technical climbing capability. Over." The radio crackled with multiple voices, shock and relief, mixing with demands for confirmation. But one voice cut through the others, hard and angry. "Petty Officer Tavai, this is Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge. You were ordered to return to base. You are in restricted terrain without authorization. You will remain in position and await proper rescue personnel. Do not attempt to move the captain. Breckenridge out. Kiana looked at Captain Voss, who despite his injuries managed a weak smile. I am guessing you broke some rules to find me, he said. A few, sir, Kiana admitted. But I found you, and that is what matters. The emergency heat packs were doing their work, bringing color back to Captain Voss's face, but Kiana knew they were temporary measures. His core temperature was still dangerously low, his injured ribs made every breath an exercise in pain, and the frostbite on his extremities needed immediate treatment in a proper medical facility. They had maybe 4 hours before his condition would begin deteriorating again, despite her field interventions. The radio crackled with traffic as the base camp mobilized. Kiana could hear Lieutenant Okafor coordinating teams, hear the excitement in voices as the news spread that Captain Voss had been found alive. But she also heard the undertone of Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge's voice, sharp and controlled, issuing orders that seemed designed more to reassert authority than to expedite rescue. All teams halt current search patterns and redeploy to staging area for equipment reconfiguration, Breckenridge ordered. We need technical climbing gear, litters, additional medical personnel. This extraction will be done properly and safely, not rushed because one sailor decided to go rogue. Sir, that is going to cost us 90 minutes minimum, Lieutenant Okafor's voice came back. We have teams already in the field with climbing equipment. We could have advance elements to Petty Officer Tavai's position within 30 minutes. Negative, Breckenridge responded. All personnel will return to base for proper coordination. We are not going to compound one instance of poor judgment with more hasty decisions. Breckenridge out. Kiana looked at Voss, who had closed his eyes but was clearly listening. His jaw was tight, whether from pain or frustration, she could not tell. The gunny really does not like being proven wrong, Voss said quietly, his voice strained. It is not about being wrong, sir, Kiana replied as she adjusted the thermal wrapping around his injured ribs. It is about control. He wanted to find you on his terms, with his methods. Me finding you undermines his authority. Kiana's radio buzzed with a private channel request. She accepted and heard Okafor's voice, low and urgent. Petty Officer Tavai, what is the captain's actual medical status? I need the real assessment, not what you're putting on the open channel. Kiana moved slightly away from Voss before responding quietly. He is stable for now, but that will not last. Early hypothermia, suspected broken ribs with possible internal complications, frostbite on hands and feet. I have him warming and stabilized, but he needs a hospital within 4 hours maximum. The 90-minute delay the gunny is ordering puts us close to that window. Understood, Okafor said. I'm going to push back on the delay. 3 minutes later, the radio traffic intensified. Okafor was arguing, professionally but firmly, that advance elements should proceed immediately while base camp prepared the full extraction team. Breckenridge was refusing, citing safety protocols and proper procedures. The debate was still ongoing when a new voice entered the channel. This is Colonel Blackwood. The base commander's crisp tone cut through the argument. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge, what is your assessment of Captain Voss's medical timeline? There was a pause before Breckenridge responded. Ma'am, Petty Officer Tavai reports he is stable. We have time to do this correctly. Petty Officer Tavai, Blackwood's voice shifted. Give me your unfiltered medical assessment. How long before Captain Voss's condition becomes critical? Kiana keyed her mic, choosing her words carefully but honestly. Ma'am, Captain Voss is currently stable due to field interventions, but he has multiple serious injuries, including suspected broken ribs and early-stage hypothermia. I can maintain his current status for approximately 4 hours before deterioration becomes likely. Any delay in extraction reduces our safety margin. The radio went silent for several seconds. Then Blackwood spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of command decision. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge, Lieutenant Okafor will take an advance team with technical gear and proceed immediately to Petty Officer Tavai's coordinates. You will coordinate the full extraction team to follow. I want Captain Voss off that mountain within 2 hours. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am, Breckenridge's voice was tight, crystal clear, and Gunnery Sergeant Blackwood added, "We will discuss proper search protocols and decision-making processes after this operation is complete." Blackwood out, Kiana felt a small surge of relief. Help was coming, and it would arrive soon enough to matter. She returned to Voss's side and continued her assessment, checking circulation in his frostbitten fingers, monitoring his breathing pattern, adjusting the heat packs as they began to cool. "You know you're probably going to face disciplinary action for this," Voss said, watching her work. "Disobeying direct orders, entering restricted terrain without authorization, conducting an unauthorized search operation." "Probably, sir," Kiana agreed. "But you are alive, so I will accept whatever consequences come." Voss was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying her face. "In Afghanistan," he said slowly, "we had this saying in my platoon. The mission is the mission. Politics, ego, rank, none of that matters when lives are on the line. You understood that better than I did yesterday. Better than Breckenridge does now." Before Kiana could respond, she heard sounds echoing down the canyon. Voices, the clink of metal gear, boots on stone. The advance team was arriving faster than she had expected. Lieutenant Okafor appeared at the entrance to the shelter, his dark face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw Voss conscious and alert. "Captain, sir, good to see you alive," Okafor said, moving into the shelter with two other Marines carrying technical gear and a medical pack. "Good to be alive, Lieutenant," Voss replied. "Thanks to Petty Officer Tavai here." Okafor glanced at Kiana with something that looked like respect and perhaps a bit of awe. "Petty Officer, that was some serious tracking work. Half the NCOs back at base are saying you must have gotten lucky, but those of us who saw your evidence know better." One of the Marines with Okafor, a corporal named Ivy Salazar, knelt beside Kiana. "I brought the advanced medical kit like you requested over the radio," she said quietly. "Also, fair warning, Gunny Breckenridge is beyond angry. He was on the radio the whole way here telling anyone who would listen that your tracking was reckless and that you put yourself and the captain at unnecessary risk." Kiana nodded, unsurprised. "How long until the full extraction team arrives?" "Maybe 45 minutes, Salazar said. They're bringing a litter and full climbing rig to get the captain up the canyon safely." Okafor was examining the shelter and the route Voss must have taken to reach it. "Captain, can you walk me through what happened? How did you end up here?" Voss's face tightened with an expression that mixed embarrassment and something darker. "I had a PTSD episode when the storm hit, Lieutenant. Lost situational awareness. Thought I was back in the Hindu Kush. I was not navigating rationally. I was navigating to a memory." The shelter went quiet. Mental health issues, especially PTSD, remained a complicated topic in the military despite increasing awareness and decreasing stigma. Officers, particularly ones on the promotion track like Voss, faced additional pressure to appear unaffected by combat trauma. Okafor's response was immediate and matter-of-fact. "Understood, sir. That explains the route deviation. I will include it in my report as a contributing factor to the incident." Voss looked surprised, then grateful. The lieutenant was offering him a path that acknowledged the truth without making it the centerpiece of an official investigation that could damage his career. Over the next 30 minutes, Kiana worked with Salazar to further stabilize Voss for transport. They carefully wrapped his ribs for support, treated his frostbite with proper protocols, and got more heat into his core. Okafor and the other Marine rigged anchor points for the upcoming vertical extraction from the canyon. The main extraction team arrived, led by Staff Sergeant Kimura, a skilled mountaineer who quickly assessed the technical challenges. But Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge arrived with them, and his first action was to approach Kiana with barely controlled fury. "Petty Officer Devai, you are relieved of duties and will return to base camp immediately," Breckenridge said, his voice low but intense. "You're confined to quarters pending disciplinary proceedings. Your actions today were reckless, insubordinate, and contrary to every principle of military order." "Gunny, I need her here for the medical transport," Kimura interjected. "She knows the captain's injuries better than anyone. She can brief you." "Then she is gone," Breckenridge snapped. Captain Voss's voice, weak but clear, cut through the argument. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge, Petty Officer Tavai, is the reason I am alive. She tracked me through conditions that your search teams could not navigate. She provided life-saving medical care. And she did it because she was willing to trust her judgment over your orders. I will be recommending her for commendation, not discipline. Breckenridge's face flushed dark. Sir, with all due respect, you are injured and not in a position to make command decisions regarding personnel discipline. The canyon fell silent, tension crackling between the assembled personnel. Finally, Lieutenant Okafor stepped forward. Gunny, I recommend we focus on getting the captain evacuated safely. Questions of discipline and commendation can be addressed once everyone is back at base and the captain has received proper medical treatment. Breckenridge stared at Okafor, then at Voss, then at Kiana. His eyes held something beyond anger, something that looked like a man watching his authority crumble in real time. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. But this conversation is not over. Not by a long shot. As the extraction began, with Voss being carefully secured to the litter and the technical rigging being tested, Kiana felt the weight of what had happened settling on her shoulders. She had found the captain, she had saved his life, but she had also made powerful enemies and violated fundamental military protocols. The next few days would determine whether her actions would be seen as heroic initiative or dangerous insubordination. But as she watched Voss being carefully lifted from the shelter, as she saw his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, she knew she would make the same choices again. The extraction from Deadfall Canyon took 3 hours of careful technical climbing, with Captain Voss secured in a litter and multiple teams coordinating the vertical ascent through treacherous terrain. Kiana remained with the medical team throughout, monitoring Voss's vitals and adjusting his pain management as needed. By the time they reached the top of the canyon and the waiting ambulance, the afternoon sun was already dropping toward the western peaks. Kiana rode in the ambulance with Voss to the base medical facility, a small but well-equipped clinic designed to handle the routine injuries and emergencies of mountain warfare training. The duty physician, Commander Patricia Chun, took one look at Voss's condition and immediately ordered a medevac helicopter to the Regional Trauma Center in Reno. You did good work keeping him stable, Commander Chun told Kiana as they waited for the helicopter. Those ribs could have punctured a lung if he had been moved incorrectly or if his condition had deteriorated further. Your field treatment probably saved his life. The words should have felt like validation, but Kiana was too exhausted and too aware of the storm brewing around her actions to feel much of anything. She had been awake for nearly 36 hours, had tracked through brutal terrain, and had violated direct orders from Senior NCO. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving only fatigue and uncertainty. Captain Voss reached out and caught her hand before they loaded him onto the helicopter. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear and intense. Thank you, he said simply, for everything, for not listening to Breckenridge, for trusting yourself. Just doing my job, sir, Kiana replied. No, Voss said firmly. You went way beyond your job. You put your career on the line because you knew you were right. That takes courage most people do not have. The helicopter crew arrived, and the moment ended, Voss being whisked away toward proper trauma care. Kiana stood on the landing pad, watching the aircraft disappear into the evening sky, feeling suddenly very alone. Petty Officer Devai, report to Colonel Blackwood's office immediately, a voice called from behind her. A young Marine Lance Corporal stood at attention, clearly uncomfortable with whatever message he was delivering. The colonel wants to see you right away, ma'am. The walk to the base commander's office felt longer than the entire trek through Deadfall Canyon. Kiana's mind raced through possible scenarios. Best case, a formal reprimand and some extra duty. Worst case, non-judicial punishment under Article 15, reduction in rank, possibly even a court-martial for disobeying orders in a way that could be construed as endangering personnel. Colonel Blackwood's office was austere and functional, the walls decorated with unit citations and photographs from various deployments. The colonel herself sat behind a heavy wooden desk, her expression unreadable. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge stood to one side, his posture rigid and his face set in hard lines. Lieutenant Okafor stood on the other side, and his presence gave Kiana a small measure of hope. Petty Officer Tavai reporting as ordered. "Ma'am," Kiana said, coming to attention. At ease, Blackwood said, her voice neutral. "Sit down. We have some things to discuss." Kiana sat in the chair, facing the desk, her back straight despite her exhaustion. She could feel Breckenridge's anger radiating from across the room. "I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing reports, radio transcripts, and witness statements regarding today's events," Blackwood began. "Petty Officer Tavai, you disobeyed a direct order from Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge to return to base camp. You entered restricted terrain without authorization. You conducted an unauthorized search operation. Do you dispute any of these facts?" "No, ma'am," Kiana replied. "Those facts are accurate." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge has recommended that you face non-judicial punishment for insubordination and reckless endangerment. He argues that your actions, regardless of outcome, violated fundamental military discipline and set a dangerous precedent. What do you have to say to that?" Kiana took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Ma'am, I do not dispute that I violated direct orders. I made a tactical decision in the field based on tracking evidence and my assessment that Captain Voss had limited time before his injuries became critical. I believed then and believe now that following the gunnery sergeant's orders would have resulted in Captain Voss's death. I accept responsibility for my actions and any consequences that follow." Breckenridge stepped forward, his voice tight. "Colonel, with all respect to the outcome, we cannot allow junior personnel to simply disregard orders whenever they disagree with command decisions. What Petty Officer Tavai did was textbook insubordination. If we do not discipline this behavior, we undermine the entire chain of command." Lieutenant Okafor cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if I may, I reviewed Petty Officer Tavai's tracking evidence, and her analysis was sound. She identified a legitimate trail that our standard search patterns would never have covered. Her wilderness tracking experience exceeded that of anyone else in the search operation. She made a judgment call based on specialized expertise. Specialized expertise does not override military discipline," Breckenridge shot back. "Every private who thinks they know better than their sergeant could use the same excuse." Blackwood raised a hand, silencing both men. She looked at Kiana for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Petty Officer Tavai, let me ask you something. If you could go back to this morning, knowing what you know now about the consequences you might face, would you make the same decision?" Kiana did not hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Voss would be dead if I had returned to base when ordered. I could not let that happen when I had the skills and evidence to prevent it. Even if it cost you your career," Blackwood pressed. "Even then, ma'am," Kiana said quietly, "some things matter more than career advancement." The room fell silent. Blackwood leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her face. Finally, she spoke. "Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge, your concerns about discipline are noted and valid. However, I have also reviewed your initial search plan and your subsequent decisions during the rescue operation. You dismissed Petty Officer Tavai's tracking expertise without examination of her evidence. You ordered a delay in the extraction that could have endangered Captain Voss's life. You prioritized maintaining control over achieving the mission objective, which was to find Captain Voss alive." Breckenridge's face went rigid. "Ma'am, I followed standard search and rescue protocols." "You followed protocols that were designed for different circumstances," Blackwood corrected. "When presented with new information and specialized expertise, you rejected both because they came from someone you perceived as outside your authority structure. That is a failure of leadership, Gunnery Sergeant." The atmosphere in the office shifted dramatically. Kiana saw Breckenridge's hands clench into fists at his sides. "Petty Officer Tavai," Blackwood continued, turning her attention back to Kiana. "What you did was technically insubordinate. In most circumstances, that would result in significant discipline. However, these were not most circumstances. You possessed specialized knowledge that was directly relevant to the mission. You identified evidence that others missed. You made a tactical decision that saved a Marine officer's life. While I cannot officially condone disobedience, I can recognize that sometimes rigid adherence to protocol costs lives. Blackwood pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. This is a letter of counseling. It will note that you violated orders and that such behavior is generally unacceptable. It will also note the mitigating circumstances and the successful outcome. It will not be a formal reprimand and will not impact your advancement potential. Consider a slap on the wrist that acknowledges both the technical violation and the exceptional circumstances. Kiana stared at the document, hardly believing what she was hearing. Ma'am, I understand. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Blackwood said, and for the first time a slight smile crossed her face. Because I am also recommending you for a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for your actions. Your tracking skills and medical care under adverse conditions merit recognition. Lieutenant Okafor has already submitted supporting documentation. Breckinridge made a sound that might have been a protest, but Blackwood's sharp glance silenced him immediately. Gunnery Sergeant Breckinridge, you are hereby relieved as Senior Instructor for Search and Rescue Training, Blackwood continued. You will be reassigned to administrative duties pending a full review of your decision-making during this incident. You are dismissed. Breckinridge's face went white, then red. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He came to attention, executed a sharp about-face, and left the office without a word. The door closed behind him with controlled force. When he was gone, Blackwood's demeanor softened slightly. Petty Officer Devine, you put me in a very difficult position today. Military discipline exists for good reasons, but so does initiative and expertise. You walked a razor's edge between the two. I understand, ma'am, Kiana said. I hope you do, Blackwood replied, because I'm also assigning you as the new lead instructor for wilderness survival and tracking at this facility. Effective immediately. We clearly need that expertise integrated into our mountain warfare curriculum, and you have proven you possess both the skills and the judgment to teach it. Kiana felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified to be an instructor at this level. Blackwood's smile returned, sharper this time. Yesterday, you were not sure you belonged here at all. Today, you saved a Marine captain's life using skills everyone else dismissed. Tomorrow, you will teach those skills to the next generation. Dismissed, Petty Officer. Kiana stood, saluted, and left the office in a daze. Lieutenant Okafor followed her out into the hallway. Congratulations, he said quietly. You earned it. I feel like I just survived something, Kiana admitted, not celebrated it. That is what real leadership feels like sometimes, Okafor said. Welcome to the club. 3 days after the rescue, Kiana stood in the wilderness training area preparing her first official class. The morning air was crisp and clear, the storm system that had nearly claimed Captain Voss now just a memory in the snow patterns on the ground. 12 Marines sat in a semicircle before her, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Among them was Corporal Ivy Salazar, who offered an encouraging nod. Kiana had spent the previous 2 days preparing curriculum, gathering equipment, and fighting the voice in her head that insisted she was not qualified to teach these Marines anything. The imposter syndrome that had plagued her since arriving at Bridgeport had not disappeared just because Colonel Blackwood had given her a new assignment. If anything, it had intensified. Good morning, Kiana began, her voice steadier than she felt. I am Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Tavai, and I will be your instructor for wilderness tracking and survival techniques. Some of you may have heard about the recent rescue operation in Deadfall Canyon. Today, I'm going to teach you the skills that made that rescue possible. One of the Marines, a Lance Corporal named Martinez, raised his hand. Ma'am, no disrespect, but you are Navy. Why should we learn tracking from someone who is not even a Marine? Kiana had expected this question. It was the same doubt she had seen in Captain Voss's eyes 3 days ago, the same dismissal she had faced from Breckinridge. But now she had an answer grounded in experience rather than credentials. Because tracking does not care about your branch of service, Lance Corporal Kiana replied. It cares about whether you can read sign, understand terrain, and think like the person you're trying to find. I learned these skills from my father, who learned them from Alaskan indigenous trackers and SAR professionals. Those skills saved Captain Voss's life. Today, I'm going to give you those same skills so you can save lives too. The skepticism in Martinez's eyes did not entirely disappear, but he nodded and settled back to listen. Kiana spent the next hour teaching basic tracking principles. She showed them how to read compressed snow, how to identify disturbance patterns in vegetation, how to use terrain features to predict movement. She taught them the difference between sign and noise, between patterns that mattered and patterns that deceived. Most importantly, she taught them to think. When you track someone, you're not just following footprints, Kiana explained, kneeling beside a section of disturbed ground. You are understanding their mental state, their physical condition, their level of training. A trained Marine moves differently than a panicked civilian. An injured person leaves different sign than a healthy one. Your job is to read the story the land is telling you. She led them through practical exercises, having them track each other through the forest, identifying sign, and explaining their reasoning. Some caught on quickly. Others struggled. But all of them engaged with the material in a way that told Kiana they were beginning to understand the value of what she was teaching. During a break, Lieutenant Okafor appeared at the training area. He watched for several minutes as Kiana worked with a small group on reading disturbance patterns in pine needles, then approached when she finished. "Looks like a solid class," he said. "The students seem engaged." "Some more than others," Kiana replied. Lance Corporal Martinez is still not convinced a sailor should be teaching Marines. "Give him time," Okafor said. "He is prior infantry and has that mindset that only grunts know anything worth knowing. But he is smart enough to recognize skill when he sees it demonstrated repeatedly." Okafor pulled out his phone and showed Kiana a message. "Thought you'd want to know. Captain Voss is out of the hospital in Reno. Broken ribs are healing. Frostbite was minor enough that he will make a full recovery. He's being transferred back here in 2 days for light duty while he finishes recovery." "That is good news," Kiana said, feeling genuine relief. "I was worried about internal injuries." "He asked about you," Okafor added, his tone carefully neutral. "Wanted to know if you had faced disciplinary action." I told him about the letter of counseling and the medal recommendation. He seemed pleased, but also said he wanted to speak with you personally when he returns. The thought made Kiana uncomfortable in ways she could not quite define. Captain Voss represented everything she had been trying to prove herself against, the embodiment of the doubt that she belonged in this environment. The fact that he now owed her his life created a strange dynamic she was not sure how to navigate. That afternoon, Kiana received an unexpected visitor at her quarters. Gunnery Sergeant Breckenridge stood at her door, out of uniform in civilian clothes, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Kiana considered not answering, but military courtesy and curiosity won out. "Gunny," she said, opening the door but not inviting him in. "What can I do for you?" Breckenridge looked uncomfortable, a state Kiana had never seen him in before. "I came to say something that does not come easy to me," he began. "I was wrong. About you, about your tracking, about the search. I let my ego and my resentment of Captain Voss cloud my judgment, and it nearly cost him his life." Kiana stood silent, unsure how to respond to this admission. "I spent 23 years earning my position here," Breckenridge continued. "When they gave the command slot to Voss instead of promoting me, I took it personally. I wanted him to fail so I could be proven right. When you found evidence that contradicted my search plan, I rejected it because accepting it meant accepting that I was wrong. That is not leadership, that is pride." The gunny paused, looking past Kiana toward the mountains visible through her window. "I have been relieved of my instructor position, and honestly, I deserved worse. But before I transfer out, I wanted you to know that what you did took real courage. The kind I thought I had, but maybe lost somewhere along the way." "Thank you," Gunny, Kiana said quietly. "That means more than you might think." Breckenridge nodded once, sharply, then turned and walked away. Kiana watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The man had been an obstacle and an antagonist, but he was also a Marine who had spent decades serving honorably before his bitterness had consumed his judgment. That evening, Kiana sat in her quarters reviewing her notes for the next day's training. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It took her a moment to realize it was from Captain Voss, somehow having obtained her contact information. The message was brief. Heard you're teaching tracking now. Proud of you. Also, we need to talk when I get back. Not about the rescue. About what happens next. Kiana stared at the message, trying to decode its meaning. What happens next could refer to many things. Her new role as instructor. The formal investigation into the incident. The medal recommendation. Or something else entirely that she was not seeing. She typed back a simple response. Looking forward to it, sir. Glad you are recovering well. The reply came immediately. Stop calling me sir in text messages. We saved each other's lives. That earns first name basis. Ethan. Kiana smiled despite herself. Then you should call me Kiana. Deal, came the response. See you in 2 days, Kiana. She set down her phone and returned to her lesson plans, but her mind kept drifting to the conversation ahead. Captain Ethan Voss had been her skeptic, her doubter, the voice of all the imposter syndrome she had carried. Now, he was becoming something else, though she was not entirely sure what. The next morning brought another class, and this time Lance Corporal Martinez approached her before the session began. Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for my attitude yesterday. I watched the video footage from your helmet camera during the rescue, the stuff they showed at the safety brief. The way you read that terrain and found the captain was incredible. I have never seen tracking like that. Thank you, Lance Corporal, Kiana replied. But you do not need to apologize for being skeptical. Skepticism is healthy as long as you are willing to change your mind when presented with evidence. The class that day went better than the first. The Marines were more engaged, asked better questions, and demonstrated genuine interest in mastering the skills. Kiana found herself relaxing into the role of instructor, discovering that teaching these techniques came naturally when she stopped worrying about whether she had the right to teach them. During a practical exercise tracking through dense forest, Corporal Salazar pulled Kiana aside. You know the word is spreading about you, right? About what you did. Marines from other units are requesting to attend your classes. Colonel Blackwood is talking about making wilderness tracking a mandatory part of the mountain warfare curriculum. Kiana felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Not just pride, but belonging. The sense that she had found her place, earned her position through action rather than credentials. That evening, she received another text from Voss. This one included a photo of him in a hospital bed, giving a thumbs up despite the bandages and medical equipment. Caption read, Doc say I can return to limited duty tomorrow instead of 2 days. Getting restless. Also, I have been thinking a lot about our conversation in the canyon. About PTSD and hiding weakness and all the things we do not talk about in the Corps. I think it's time to change that. Kiana looked at the photo, at the vulnerability in Voss's expression despite his attempt at humor, and understood something fundamental had shifted. The rescue had changed both of them, had forced them to confront their own limitations and strengths in ways that went beyond professional competence. She texted back, Courage is not pretending you have no wounds. It is acknowledging them and moving forward anyway. The reply came quickly. Exactly. See you tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about. Kiana set down her phone and looked out at the mountains, at the terrain that had nearly claimed a life and had instead revealed her own strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new questions about what came next. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt since arriving at Bridgeport. She felt like she belonged. Captain Ethan Voss returned to Bridgeport on a gray morning when low clouds obscured the peaks and turned the world into varying shades of stone and shadow. Kiana was leading her third wilderness tracking class when she saw him arrive, moving carefully due to wrapped ribs, but walking under his own power. He caught her eye across the training area and raised a hand in greeting, and she felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with military hierarchy. After the class ended, She found him waiting near the operations building, leaning against the wall in a way that suggested his ribs were bothering him more than he wanted to admit. He wore his uniform, but had removed his cover, and his dark hair was slightly longer than regulation, probably a result of his hospital stay. "Kiana," he said as she approached, and the use of her first name in this setting felt both natural and strange. "You have a minute to talk." "Of course, sir," she began, then caught herself. "Ethan." "Yes." They walked together toward a quieter area near the tree line, moving slowly to accommodate his healing injuries. For several moments, neither spoke, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Voss broke it. "I have been doing a lot of thinking in the hospital," he said, "about what happened, about why it happened, about what comes next. The Marine Corps sent a psychologist to evaluate me. Standard procedure after a PTSD incident. We had some interesting conversations." "How did that go?" Kiana asked, carefully aware this was sensitive territory. "Better than I expected," Voss admitted. "I have been carrying Afghanistan with me for 3 years, pretending it did not affect me, because I thought admitting weakness would end my career. Turns out, pretending almost ended my life instead. The psych helped me understand that getting lost in that storm was not really about the storm. It was about me running from things I was not ready to face." Kiana listened without interrupting, recognizing the courage it took for an infantry officer to speak this openly about mental health struggles. "When I was in that canyon, injured and freezing, I kept thinking about how stupid it was," Voss continued. "How I had let pride and fear drive me to deny I needed help. And then you showed up, this corpseman I had dismissed and underestimated, and you saved my life by doing exactly what I said you could not do. The irony was not lost on me. I was just using the skills my father taught me," Kiana said. "No." Voss stopped walking and turned to face her. "You were being brave enough to trust yourself even when everyone in authority told you that you were wrong. That is not just skill, that is character. Something I thought I had until I realized I had been lying to myself for years." The vulnerability in his voice made Kiana's chest tighten. She recognized the feeling because she had experienced her own version of it, her own struggle with belonging and worth. "I understand what it feels like to doubt yourself," she said quietly. "To feel like maybe you do not deserve to be where you are. I have felt that way since I arrived at Bridgeport. Still feel it sometimes, even now." Voss studied her face with an intensity that made her look away. "That is what I wanted to talk to you about. I am recommending you for permanent assignment here as the Wilderness Survival and Tracking Specialist. Not temporary instructor duty, but a dedicated billet. It is a new position, one that Colonel Blackwood and I have been developing. The Mountain Warfare Training Center needs your expertise integrated into every level of training." Kiana felt the words hit her like a physical impact. A permanent position meant recognition, meant belonging, meant her skills were valued at the institutional level rather than just tolerated. "I do not know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," Voss replied with a slight smile that transformed his usually stern features. "The Corps needs people who have the courage to do what is right even when it is hard. You prove you are that person. I want to make sure we do not lose you to another assignment." "There is something else," Voss continued after a moment. "The psych eval. It is going to be part of my record now. My PTSD diagnosis. Some people are saying it should disqualify me from command positions, that having mental health issues makes me unreliable. There's going to be a board review to determine my fitness for continued service in leadership roles." The pain in his voice was evident, and Kiana felt anger rise on his behalf. "That is not fair. You had an episode under extreme stress, but you still made rational decisions before that. You called the training group back when the storm hit. You thought you were navigating to safety. Your tactics were sound, even if your perception was compromised. Try telling that to the people who think mental health problems mean weakness," Voss said bitterly. "I have a combat record, multiple deployments, commendations for valor. But now I have a PTSD diagnosis, and suddenly everything I have accomplished gets questioned." Kiana stepped closer, her voice firm. "Then you fight back. You show them that acknowledging your struggles makes you stronger, not weaker. You use your experience to help other people who are dealing with the same things but are too afraid to speak up. You become the example of what courage actually looks like. Voss looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You really believe that, don't you? I have to, Kiana said, because if being honest about our limitations and still doing the work anyway is not courage, then I do not know what is. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Okafor approaching with a tablet in hand. Captain, good to see you back, sir. Kiana, I need to show you both something. We just received the after-action analysis from the rescue operation. Okafor pulled up a document that detailed the timeline, the search patterns, the eventual rescue. But what caught Kiana's attention was a section highlighted in yellow. The review board concluded that the standard search protocols were inadequate for the terrain and conditions, Okafor explained. They are recommending a complete overhaul of search and rescue procedures for mountain warfare training. They specifically cited your tracking methodology as the foundation for new protocols. This is going Corps-wide. Kiana stared at the document, hardly believing what she was reading. Her techniques, the skills her father had taught her in the Alaskan wilderness, were being adopted as official Marine Corps doctrine. There is more, Okafor continued, scrolling to another section. Captain Voss, the board found that your decision to end the training exercise when the storm hit was tactically sound and likely prevented additional casualties. They ruled that your PTSD episode was a medical incident, not a command failure. They are recommending you remain in your current position with the stipulation that you continue mental health support. Voss's face showed a complex mixture of relief and emotion. He took a breath, steadying himself. That is the best outcome I could have hoped for. It gets better, Okafor said, and his expression showed he was enjoying delivering good news. Colonel Blackwood convinced the Commandant's office that both of you represent a new model for integrating specialized expertise and mental health awareness in a combat arms training. You're being written up as a case study in effective leadership under adverse conditions. The three of them stood together in the gray morning light, processing what this meant. Kiana had gone from being dismissed as just a sailor to becoming the foundation of new Marine Corps doctrine. Voss had gone from hiding his PTSD to being recognized for his honest acknowledgement of it. Both transformations had happened because they had been willing to be vulnerable, to admit limitation while still pushing forward. I need to ask you something, Voss said to Kiana after Okafor left to file his report. And I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you think less of me now? Knowing about the PTSD, knowing I got lost because my mind broke under stress? Kiana did not hesitate. I think more of you, because you're not pretending it did not happen. You are facing it and working through it. That takes more strength than pretending to be perfect. Voss nodded slowly, and some tension Kiana had not even noticed seemed to leave his shoulders. My father was in Vietnam. Never talked about what he experienced there. Died of a heart attack at 53, probably from decades of carrying stress he never addressed. I do not want to be him. I want to be someone who breaks the cycle. Then be that person, Kiana said. Teach others that seeking help is strength, not weakness. Use your position to change the culture. Will you help me? Voss asked. With the new training protocols, with integrating mental health awareness into the survival curriculum. I cannot do this alone. The request carried weight beyond the professional. It was an acknowledgement of partnership, of mutual respect earned through shared crisis. Kiana recognized it as a turning point, the moment when they stopped being just a captain and a corpsman and became something more. Colleagues, allies, maybe even friends. Yes, she said, we will do it together. That evening, Kiana walked alone through the training area where she had found her first signs of Captain Voss's trail. The snow had mostly melted now, revealing the granite and pine beneath. She thought about her father, about the lessons he had taught her in wilderness far from here. She wondered if he would be proud of what she had accomplished, how she had taken his teachings and turned them into something larger. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Alaska. Your father would have loved this. The photo you sent of you teaching Marines to track. He always said you had the gift. Kiana replied with a simple thank you, but the message stirred something deep. She had spent so long proving herself, fighting to belong, struggling with the feeling that she was an imposter in a world that did not value what she brought. Now she understood that the struggle itself had been necessary. The doubt had pushed her to excellence. The outsider perspective had allowed her to see solutions others missed. Another text arrived, this time from Voss. Tomorrow, 0800 my office. Let's start planning the new curriculum. And Kiana, thank you for everything. She smiled and typed back. See you at 0800. And you are welcome, Ethan. The mountains loomed dark against the evening sky, no longer threatening, but familiar. Kiana stood looking at them for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons to teach, new battles to fight. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had achieved. She belonged here, not because someone had given her permission, but because she had earned it through courage, skill, and the willingness to trust herself even when everyone else doubted. That was a belonging no one could take away. The meeting in Captain Voss's office the next morning marked the beginning of something unprecedented at the Mountain Warfare Training Center. Kiana arrived at precisely 0800 to find Voss already at work, his desk covered with training manuals, curriculum documents, and medical research papers on combat stress and PTSD. He looked up when she entered, and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes suggested he had not slept much. Coffee, he said, gesturing to a pot in the corner. I made it strong because we have a lot of ground to cover. Kiana poured herself a cup and sat across from him. The office was sparse but functional, decorated only with a single photograph of a Marine unit in Afghanistan and a topographic map of the training area. She noticed a new addition since her last visit, a small card on the desk that read one day at a time, the kind of reminder common in mental health recovery programs. Voss caught her looking at it and gave a rueful smile. Gift from my therapist. Says I need visible reminders that healing is a process, not a destination. Figured if I'm going to advocate for mental health awareness, I should practice what I preach. I think that is wise, Kiana said. Voss pulled out a thick folder and opened it. Colonel Blackwood gave me 48 hours to develop a proposal for integrating your tracking methodology and mental health awareness into the standard mountain warfare curriculum. The Commandant's office wants a pilot program running within 30 days. No pressure. Kiana leaned forward to examine the documents. That is an aggressive timeline, which is why I need your help, Voss said. You know the tracking side better than anyone. I know the tactical and leadership components. Together, we might actually pull this off. They spent the next 4 hours working through the curriculum framework. Kiana outlined the progression of tracking skills, from basic sign recognition to advanced behavioral analysis. Voss integrated these with existing tactical training, showing how tracking could enhance reconnaissance, search and rescue, and even combat operations. But the most challenging part was the mental health component. How do we teach Marines to recognize combat stress in themselves and their teammates without making it seem like weakness? Voss asked, frustration evident in his voice. The culture is so ingrained. Admitting you are struggling feels like admitting you are unreliable. Kiana thought about her own journey, her struggles with imposter syndrome and belonging. We frame it as tactical awareness, she suggested. Just like you teach Marines to recognize signs of dehydration or heat injury, you teach them to recognize signs of psychological stress. Make it a readiness issue, not a character issue. Voss's eyes lit up. That could work. Combat effectiveness depends on mental state as much as physical condition. If we present mental health monitoring as force multiplication rather than weakness acknowledgement, it fits existing military frameworks. They developed exercises that combine tracking with stress recognition. Scenarios where students would have to identify not just physical trails, but behavioral indicators of someone under psychological duress. Case studies drawn from real search and rescue operations, including Voss's own experience, presented anonymously as teaching examples. Around noon, Lieutenant Okafor arrived with Corporal Salazar, both having been invited to contribute to the planning. The group expanded the conversation, bringing in perspectives from different ranks and experiences. Salazar shared her own story of dealing with anxiety after a deployment, how she had hidden it for months before finally seeking help. I was terrified they would take away my clearance or reassign me to some nothing job, Salazar admitted. But when I finally talked to someone, I found out half my unit was dealing with similar issues. We were all hiding it from each other because we thought we were the only ones. That is exactly what we need to change, Voss said, making notes. The isolation, the feeling that you are alone and struggling. If we normalize talking about mental health from day one of training, maybe we prevent situations like mine where it takes a near-death experience to force honesty. The planning session stretched into the afternoon. They mapped out a 12-week pilot program that would integrate wilderness tracking, tactical decision-making under stress, and mental health awareness into a cohesive curriculum. Kiana would lead the tracking components, Voss would oversee tactical integration, and they would bring in mental health professionals to co-teach the psychological elements. As the others left to handle various coordination tasks, Kiana and Voss remained in the office, refining the final details. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the maps and papers scattered on the desk. "Can I ask you something personal?" Voss said after a stretch of companionable silence. "What made you so certain you were right about tracking me, when everyone, including me, had dismissed you as just a corpsman who did not belong?" Kiana considered the question carefully. "My father used to say that being underestimated was an advantage if you did not let it make you doubt yourself. I spent my whole childhood being the only girl on search and rescue missions, the only Samoan kid in a mostly white Alaskan town, the only teenager who wanted to track instead of play sports. I learned early that proving myself meant ignoring other people's expectations and trusting my own judgment. That must have been lonely," Voss observed. "Sometimes," Kiana admitted, "but also made me certain of who I was and what I could do. When I found that first sign of your trail, I knew I was right. Not hoped, not guessed. Knew. That certainty came from thousands of hours of experience, and no amount of rank or authority could make me doubt it." Voss nodded slowly. "I wish I had that kind of certainty about myself, about my own judgment. After Afghanistan, after watching friends die because of decisions I made or did not make, I started second-guessing everything. The PTSD just made it worse, made me question whether I could trust my own mind." "You could trust it," Kiana said firmly. "Your mind gave you an episode under extreme stress, but that does not invalidate every other decision you have ever made. You ended the training when the storm hit. You tried to navigate to what you perceived as safety. Even compromised, you were trying to lead." Voss looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and something else she could not quite identify. "You have a gift for seeing the best in people, even when they cannot see it themselves." "Only when it is actually there," Kiana replied. The moment stretched between them, the office suddenly feeling smaller and more intimate. Voss cleared his throat and looked back at the papers, but the atmosphere had shifted in some subtle way. "We should probably call it for today," he said. "We have made good progress. Tomorrow we can start reaching out to the mental health providers and getting their input on the curriculum." Kiana gathered her notes and stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Ethan, for what it is worth, I think what you are doing here is incredibly brave. Using your own experience to help others. A lot of people would hide what happened and hope everyone forgot about it. Hiding almost killed me," Voss said quietly. "I am done hiding." That evening, Kiana found herself unable to settle. She walked through the base, her mind churning with the day's planning and conversations. The relationship between her and Voss had evolved into something complex and hard to define. Professional respect, certainly. Friendship, definitely. But there was also an undercurrent of connection that felt deeper, forged in the crucible of crisis and vulnerability. Her phone rang with a video call from her mother in Alaska. Kiana answered and saw her mother's warm face fill the screen, the familiar kitchen in Fairbanks visible behind her. "Kiana, darling, your father's old SAR team reached out to me," her mother said, excitement in her voice. "They heard about what you did, about the Marine captain you tracked and rescued. They want to know if you would do a video training session with them, share your techniques." They said what you accomplished was extraordinary even by their standards. Kiana felt emotion well up unexpectedly. Dad's team wants to learn from me? They said he would be so proud. Her mother continued, her own eyes glistening. They said you took everything he taught you and made it even better. That you honored his legacy by saving a life. The conversation lasted another 30 minutes, her mother sharing stories of her father's SAR work, the lives he had saved, the skills he had passed on. When they finally ended the call, Kiana sat in the darkness of her quarters, feeling the weight of inheritance and responsibility. A text arrived from Voss. Just got word from Colonel Blackwood. The Commandant's office approved our proposal. We are officially greenlit for the pilot program. This is happening. Kiana smiled and typed back. We did it. Well, we started it. Now comes the hard part of actually making it work. The response came quickly. We will make it work. I have faith in us. That simple statement, I have faith in us, carried layers of meaning. Professional confidence, personal trust, and something more that neither of them had yet acknowledged directly. Kiana understood that their partnership was entering new territory, a collaboration built on shared trauma and mutual respect that could become something significant if they let it. She thought about the next day, about the work ahead, about the Marines they would teach, and the lives they might save by normalizing both tracking skills and mental health awareness. The mission was bigger than either of them individually, but together they had the chance to create real change. Kiana looked out her window at the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Somewhere out there, Deadfall Canyon waited in darkness, the place where everything had changed, where a desperate search had become a rescue, where dismissal had become respect, where two people struggling with their own demons had found unexpected alliance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Kiana allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Not just belonging, but purpose. Not just acceptance, but certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The point of no return had passed. There was only forward now, into whatever came next. The pilot program launched on a Monday morning with 32 Marines selected from units across the training center. Kiana stood beside Captain Voss in front of the assembled students, feeling the weight of expectation and opportunity. This was the moment when theory became practice, when all their planning either proved itself or failed spectacularly. Good morning, Voss began, his voice carrying the authority of command tempered by something new. Humility, perhaps, or hard-earned wisdom. You have been selected for the inaugural Integrated Wilderness Survival and Tactical Readiness Program. Over the next 12 weeks, you will learn advanced tracking, survival skills, tactical decision-making under stress, and mental resilience techniques. This program exists because I nearly died in these mountains due to factors I did not understand or address. The directness of his admission created a ripple of surprise through the assembled Marines. Officers did not typically open training by discussing their failures. I am Captain Ethan Voss, and I have PTSD from my deployments to Afghanistan, Voss continued, his voice steady. During a winter storm 3 weeks ago, I experienced an episode that caused me to become disoriented and lost in dangerous terrain. I would have died from my injuries and exposure if not for the tracking expertise of Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tavai, who will be your primary instructor for wilderness skills. Kiana stepped forward, meeting the eyes of students who range from fresh-faced privates to experienced sergeants. Some looked skeptical, others curious, a few openly impressed. What Captain Voss is demonstrating right now is the foundation of everything we will teach you, Kiana said. Tactical honesty, the ability to acknowledge limitation, seek help, and adapt to circumstances beyond your control. In the wilderness, pride kills. In combat, unaddressed stress kills. This program will teach you to survive both. The first week exceeded expectations. Marines who had initially questioned learning from a Navy corpsman became engaged students once Kiana demonstrated tracking techniques in the field. She led them through progressively complex exercises, teaching them to read compressed vegetation, analyze disturbance patterns, and think like both predator and prey. But the real transformation happened during the mental health integration sessions. A civilian psychologist named Dr. Rebecca Martinez co-taught with Voss, creating scenarios where students had to recognize signs of combat stress in themselves and their teammates. The exercises were designed to feel tactical rather than therapeutic, focusing on mission effectiveness rather than emotions. During the second week, one of the senior students, a staff sergeant named Thompson who had 3 combat deployments, pulled Kiana aside after a particularly intense scenario. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something," Thompson said, his voice tight. "That exercise today, the one about recognizing when a team member is showing signs of psychological stress. I saw myself in every example. The irritability, the hypervigilance, the sleep problems. I have been dealing with this for 2 years and convinced myself it was normal." Kiana felt the weight of his admission. "That is exactly why we are teaching this, Staff Sergeant. What you are describing is not weakness. It is a normal response to abnormal circumstances. Have you considered talking to someone about it?" Thompson looked conflicted. "I am up for promotion to gunnery sergeant. If I go to mental health, that could tank my career. Or it could save your life," Kiana said gently. Captain Voss faced the same fear. He is still here, still in command, still leading Marines. Getting help made him better at his job, not worse. The conversation led to Thompson meeting privately with Dr. Martinez, the first of several students who began seeking mental health support as a direct result of the program. Word spread quickly through the base that the new curriculum was not just teaching skills, but potentially saving careers and lives. By the third week, the program had become the talk of the Mountain Warfare Training Center. Colonel Blackwood attended several sessions, taking notes and asking questions. Visitors from other training commands began requesting permission to observe. The commandant's office sent a team to document the curriculum for potential corps-wide implementation. But success brought new pressures. Kiana found herself working 12-hour days, developing lesson plans, teaching multiple sessions, and consulting with mental health professionals. The intensity of the program left little time for anything else, including processing her own evolving feelings about Voss and their partnership. One evening in the 4th week, Kiana was alone in the training office reviewing student evaluations when Voss entered, looking as exhausted as she felt. He carried 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without asking. "You look like you have not slept in days," he observed, settling into the chair across from her. "Says the man with permanent dark circles," Kiana replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Fair point," Voss admitted. "This program is consuming every waking hour. But the results are incredible. Did you see Thompson's progress report? He is not only engaging with mental health support, he is becoming an advocate for it with other senior NCOs. That is the goal," Kiana said, "creating a culture where seeking help is seen as strength rather than weakness." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sound the rustle of papers and the distant hum of base operations. Finally, Voss spoke again, his voice quieter. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not entirely sure how to say it properly. Working with you these past weeks, building this program together, it has meant more to me than I think you realize. You saved my life in that canyon, but you also gave me permission to be honest about my struggles. That second part might actually be more important." Kiana looked up from her papers, meeting his eyes across the desk. "You gave yourself permission, Ethan. I just happened to be there when you were ready to take it." "Maybe," Voss said, "but having someone who believed in me even when I did not believe in myself made all the difference. You see potential in people that they cannot see in themselves. It is a gift." The intensity in his gaze made Kiana's heart race in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. The professional boundaries that had defined their relationship were blurring into something more complex, and she suspected Voss felt it too. "We should probably maintain appropriate professional boundaries," Kiana said carefully, though part of her wanted to say the opposite. "Probably," Voss agreed, but he did not look away. "Though I'm not entirely sure what appropriate boundaries look like when 2 people have saved each other's lives and built something meaningful together. Before Kiana could respond, the door opened and Lieutenant Okafor entered with urgent news. Captain, we have a situation. One of the pilot program students, Private Chun, went out on a solo navigation exercise this afternoon and has not returned. It is getting dark and temperature is dropping fast. The moment between Kiana and Voss evaporated as they shifted immediately into crisis mode. How long overdue? Voss asked, already moving toward the map on the wall. 90 minutes past check-in time, Okafor replied. His GPS tracker shows his last position in the valley east of here, but the signal cut out 40 minutes ago. Kiana was already mentally cataloging the terrain, the weather conditions, the potential hazards. That valley has heavy tree cover and several creek crossings. If he is injured or disoriented, standard search grids might miss him. Then we use non-standard search methods, Voss said, looking directly at Kiana. Your methods? Can you lead a tracking team? Yes, Kiana said without hesitation. But I will need students from the program who have completed the advanced tracking modules. They need to see these skills applied in real conditions. Voss nodded decisively. Take whoever you need. I will coordinate base support and medical standby. Okafor, give me a full equipment manifest and weather forecast for the next 6 hours. Within 20 minutes, Kiana had assembled a 5-person tracking team, including Staff Sergeant Thompson and Corporal Salazar, both of whom had excelled in the tracking curriculum. They geared up quickly, reviewing maps and discussing strategy. This is what the program has been preparing us for, Kiana told her team as they prepared to deploy. Real application of tracking skills in time-sensitive conditions. Private Chun is one of ours, and we're going to bring him home. The search began in the fading light, with Kiana leading her team to Chen's last known position. She immediately began reading the ground, looking for the subtle signs that would indicate which direction he had gone after his GPS failed. Within 30 minutes, she found compressed grass indicating recent passage. The trail led toward rougher terrain, suggesting Chun had either gotten turned around or was following incorrect navigation. Kiana's team moved efficiently, each member applying the techniques she had taught them, working as a coordinated unit. Staff Sergeant Thompson spotted the next sign, broken branches at shoulder height on a game trail. Kiana confirmed the reading and adjusted their search vector. The team was functioning exactly as she had hoped, multiple sets of trained eyes covering more ground than she could alone. As darkness fell completely, they switched to headlamps and continued tracking. The trail became harder to follow, but Kiana's experience and her students' growing skills kept them on course. An hour into the search, Corporal Salazar called out, "Boot print here, fresh, heading northwest toward the creek drainage." Kiana examined the print and felt her pulse quicken. The print showed a stumbling gait, weight unevenly distributed. Chun was tired or possibly injured. She keyed her radio to update Voss on their progress and their current vector. 2 hours into the search, they heard it, a faint call for help echoing from somewhere ahead in the creek drainage. The team moved quickly but carefully toward the sound and found Private Chun sitting against a tree, his ankle clearly twisted and swollen. The relief on Chen's face when he saw them was immediate and profound. "I thought I was going to spend the night out here," he said. "Got turned around after crossing the creek, then rolled my ankle trying to navigate in the dark." As the team administered first aid and prepared Chun for evacuation, Kiana saw the looks on her students' faces. Pride, satisfaction, and understanding. They had just experienced exactly what the program was designed to teach them. Skills applied under pressure, teamwork under stress, and successful mission completion through preparation and training. The extraction went smoothly, with Chun walking out supported by Thompson and another Marine. When they reached base camp, Captain Voss was waiting with medical personnel and Colonel Blackwood. "Outstanding work, Petty Officer Tavai," Blackwood said as medical staff took over Chen's care. "And congratulations to your tracking team. You just demonstrated exactly why this program needs to become permanent." Voss caught Kiana's eye across the staging area and smiled, a gesture of shared accomplishment and mutual respect. They had just proven their program worked under real-world conditions. More than that, They had trained Marines who could now save lives using the same skills that had saved Voss in Deadfall Canyon. As the team debriefed and equipment was secured, Kiana felt the exhaustion of the past weeks catch up to her. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from meaningful work that mattered. She had found her purpose here, had built something that would outlast her individual presence, had trained others to carry forward the skills her father had given her. The unfinished conversation with Voss about boundaries and feelings would have to wait. But as she caught his eye one more time across the busy staging area, she saw understanding there. They both knew something significant existed between them, something that had grown from crisis into respect into something deeper. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else since that storm in the mountains. The successful rescue of Private Chun became a turning point that transformed the pilot program from experimental curriculum into institutional priority. Within 48 hours, Colonel Blackwood received authorization from Marine Corps headquarters to expand the program immediately and begin developing it for deployment across all mountain warfare training centers. The news arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered in person by a brigadier general from Training and Education Command. Kiana sat beside Captain Voss in the conference room as Brigadier General Patricia Reeves reviewed their program materials with evident approval. The general was a compact woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for transforming military training doctrine. "What you have built here is exactly what the Corps needs," General Reeves said, tapping the curriculum binder in front of her. "Integrated skills training that addresses both tactical proficiency and psychological readiness. The Commandant wants this scaled up and implemented at every mountain warfare facility within 6 months." "6 months, ma'am," Voss said carefully. "That is an aggressive timeline for a program we have only been running for 4 weeks. Which is why I am here to offer you both new assignments," Reeves replied, pulling out official-looking documents. "Captain Voss, you are being promoted to Major and reassigned to Training and Education Command Headquarters as the officer in charge of wilderness survival and psychological resilience integration. Petty Officer Tavai, you are being advanced to Hospital Corpsman First Class and transferred to the same command as the Senior Enlisted Subject Matter Expert for tracking and field survival techniques." Kiana felt the words hit her like a physical impact. Promotion and reassignment to a headquarters billet meant recognition at the highest levels of the Marine Corps. It also meant leaving Bridgeport, leaving the mountains where she had found her purpose, leaving the place where everything had changed. "Ma'am, when would these orders take effect?" Voss asked, his voice neutral, but Kiana caught the tension beneath it. 30 days, Reeves said. "That gives you time to complete the current pilot class and transition your roles here. You will both report to Quantico on the 1st of next month to begin building the institutional framework for Corps-wide implementation." After the general departed and Colonel Blackwood excused herself to handle administrative details, Kiana and Voss remained in the conference room, the official transfer orders sitting on the table between them like unexploded ordnance. "Congratulations on your promotion," Kiana said quietly. "Major Voss, you earned it." "We earned it," Voss corrected. "This program exists because you had the courage to trust your judgment over military hierarchy. The Corps is recognizing that by giving us the authority to institutionalize what we built here. But we will be leaving Bridgeport," Kiana said, voicing what they were both thinking. "Leaving the place where all of this started." Voss was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Kiana, there is something I need to say, and I have been avoiding it because of professional boundaries and regulations and all the reasons why it is complicated. But we have 30 days left here, and I do not want to spend them pretending I do not feel what I feel." Kiana's heart rate accelerated, but she met his eyes steadily. "What do you feel?" "That finding you in Deadfall Canyon saved my life in ways that go beyond physical rescue," Voss said, his voice low and intense. "You gave me permission to be honest about my struggles. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. And somewhere in building this program together, you became the person I most want to share every success and failure with. That goes beyond professional respect, Kiana. You know it does. The admission hung in the air between them, transformative and terrifying. Kiana had felt the same pull, the same growing connection that transcended their initial crisis. But acknowledging it meant confronting the complexity of military fraternization regulations, the power dynamics between an officer and enlisted personnel, and the professional relationship that was about to expand onto a much larger stage. I feel it too, Kiana said finally. But Ethan, you are about to be a major, and I am still enlisted. The regulations are clear about officer-enlisted relationships. We could jeopardize everything we have built. I know, Voss acknowledged, which is why I'm not asking you to act on anything right now. I'm just being honest about what exists between us. When we get to Quantico, when we are working together in a headquarters environment with more oversight and structure, we will need to navigate this carefully. But I wanted you to know that what I feel is real, and it is not going away just because it is inconvenient. What happens if we let this become something more and it damages our professional credibility? Kiana asked. What happens to the program? To all the Marines we are trying to help? Then we are careful, Voss said. We maintain absolute professionalism in public. We never let personal feelings compromise our judgment or the mission. We do exactly what we have been teaching our students to do, which is acknowledge reality while still functioning effectively within it. Before Kiana could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from Alaska. Her mother's number. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway to answer. Kiana, darling, I have news, her mother said, excitement and sadness mixing in her voice. The Fairbanks SAR team wants to dedicate their new training facility in your father's name. They're calling it the Thomas Tavai Wilderness Tracking Center. They want you to come speak at the dedication ceremony next month. The timing created an immediate conflict. The dedication would fall during her transition to Quantico, during the critical period when she would be establishing the new program at headquarters. But missing a ceremony honoring her father felt unconscionable. When is the ceremony? Kiana asked. The 15th of next month, her mother replied. I know it is short notice, but they wanted to honor him before winter makes travel impossible. I understand if you cannot make it, sweetheart. Your father will be proud of what you are doing regardless. Let me check with my chain of command, Kiana said. I will do everything I can to be there. When she returned to the conference room, Voss immediately noticed her troubled expression. Everything okay? My father's old SAR team is dedicating a training facility in his name, Kiana explained. The ceremony is the 15th, right in the middle of our transition to Quantico. I need to be there, but I do not know if I can get leave approved during such a critical period. Voss did not hesitate. We will make it work. Your father's legacy is part of why this program exists. Request the leave, and I will ensure it is approved, even if I have to go to the general myself. The gesture, the immediate understanding and support, reinforced everything Kiana felt about this man who had started as her skeptic and become her partner. His willingness to prioritize what mattered to her, even during a crucial professional transition, spoke to character that went beyond military competence. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The pilot program concluded with a formal graduation ceremony attended by Colonel Blackwood, General Reeves, and senior officers from across Training and Education Command. All 32 Marines completed the course, and 23 of them requested follow-on training to become instructors themselves. Staff Sergeant Thompson gave a speech during the graduation that brought unexpected emotion to the formal military ceremony. This program saved my career and probably my life, Thompson said, his voice steady but his eyes glistening. I came here thinking I was fine, that what I was experiencing was just normal stress. I learned that asking for help is not weakness, it is tactical intelligence. I learned to track not just in the wilderness, but through my own psychological terrain. And I learned that the strongest Marines are the ones honest enough to admit when they are struggling. Watching from the side of the ceremony space, Kiana felt Voss's hand briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture of shared accomplishment and mutual pride. They had done this. They had built something that was changing lives and would continue changing lives long after they left Bridgeport. That evening, there was an informal gathering of the program graduates and instructors at the base recreation center. Kiana found herself surrounded by Marines, thanking her for the training, sharing stories of how specific techniques had already helped them, promising to carry forward what they had learned. Lieutenant Okafor pulled her aside as the evening wound down. You know, you completely changed the culture here, right? Before you arrived, mental health was something people whispered about. Now, it is part of tactical planning. That is your legacy, Kiana. It is Captain Voss's legacy too, Kiana said. He had the courage to be vulnerable about his own struggles. True, Okafor agreed. But you had the courage to see his potential when everyone else was writing him off. You saved more than his life in that canyon. You saved his career and gave him a path to help thousands of other Marines. As the gathering broke up and people headed back to their quarters, Voss appeared at Kiana's side. Walk with me? They walked together through the base, past the training areas where Kiana had taught her first classes, past the operations building where they had planned the program, toward the trail that led to the overlook above Deadfall Canyon. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the thin mountain air. At the overlook, they stood together looking down into the canyon that had changed everything. Somewhere down there in the darkness was the shelter where Voss had waited to die, where Kiana had found him and brought him back. I think about that day constantly, Voss said quietly, about how close I came to dying alone in those rocks, about how you refused to accept that outcome even when everyone ordered you to. You're the most stubborn, courageous, brilliant person I have ever met, Kiana Tavai. You gave me a reason to be stubborn, Kiana replied. You were worth saving. And everything that came after, the program, the lives we have helped, it all started because I trusted myself enough to follow that trail. Voss turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the starlight. When we get to Quantico, when we start building the institutional framework, things are going to get complicated. We will be under more scrutiny, face more challenges, have less privacy. But I want you to know that whatever happens, however we have to navigate this, I am committed to making it work. Both the mission and what exists between us. Kiana met his eyes and saw the truth there, the vulnerability and strength combined. I am committed too, to all of it. They stood together at the canyon's edge, two people who had saved each other in ways that went beyond physical rescue, looking toward a future that promised both challenge and possibility. The mountains rose dark around them, silent witnesses to transformation and courage. Tomorrow they would begin packing, preparing for the transition to Quantico and a larger mission ahead. But tonight, they allowed themselves this moment of acknowledgement and hope. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but what it had created would endure. The Thomas Tavai Wilderness Tracking Center dedication ceremony took place on a brilliant autumn afternoon in Fairbanks, Alaska. Kiana stood on a wooden platform overlooking the new training facility, surrounded by the mountains and forests where her father had taught her everything that mattered. The building behind her was modest but well-equipped, designed specifically for teaching search and rescue techniques to volunteers and first responders across Alaska. Captain Voss, now Major Voss as of his promotion ceremony 3 days earlier, stood in the small crowd of attendees wearing civilian clothes and a warm jacket against the Alaska cold. He had insisted on accompanying Kiana despite the demands of their transition to Quantico, saying that honoring her father was non-negotiable. Colonel Blackwood had approved the leave without hesitation. Kiana's mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered face as the head of the Fairbanks SAR team, a grizzled veteran named Robert Chun, spoke about Thomas Tavai's legacy. Tommy Tavai saved 47 lives in his 23 years with this team, Chun said, his voice rough with emotion. He taught most of us everything we know about tracking and wilderness survival. But his greatest legacy is standing right here. His daughter Kiana took everything he taught her and used it to save a Marine officer's life in conditions that would have defeated most experienced trackers. She has since built a program that will train thousands of Marines in the skills her father pioneered. Tommy would be so damn proud. When Kiana stepped forward to speak, she had to pause and collect herself. Looking out at the SAR volunteers who had worked alongside her father at the mountains where he had taught her to read sign and understand terrain, she felt the full weight of inheritance and responsibility. My father used to say that tracking is not about following footprints, Kiana began, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. It is about understanding stories. Every broken branch, every compressed leaf, every disturbance in the natural order tells you something about the person who passed through. But more than that, it tells you about yourself, about whether you have the patience to read what is there, the humility to admit what you do not know, and the courage to trust your judgment when everyone else doubts you. She spoke for 10 minutes about her father's teachings, about how they had saved Captain Voss's life, about the program they had built at Bridgeport. She explained how his legacy was now spreading through the Marine Corps, how thousands of service members would learn techniques he had mastered in these very mountains. The hardest part of losing him was thinking his knowledge would die with him, Kiana said, her voice breaking slightly. But it did not. It lives on in everyone he taught, in everyone I teach, in every life saved, because someone learned to read the wilderness the way he did. This facility ensures that his wisdom continues teaching long after we are all gone. That is immortality of the kind that actually matters. After the ceremony, people approached Kiana with stories about her father, a woman whose teenage son Thomas had found after being lost for 2 days, a man whose climbing partner Thomas had tracked to a hidden crevasse, a young SAR volunteer who said Thomas had believed in him when no one else did. Each story reinforced what Kiana already knew but needed to hear again. Her father had made a difference that rippled outward in ways he never fully understood. Voss hung back during these conversations, giving Kiana space to connect with her father's community. But when the crowd finally thinned, he approached with 2 cups of coffee from the facility's small kitchen. "Your father sounds like he was an extraordinary man," Voss said as they walked together through the training grounds. "Reading these stories and hearing people talk about him, I see where you got your strength." "He was stubborn and sometimes impossible," Kiana said with a sad smile. "But he lived by a code that was simple and unbreakable. If someone is lost, you find them. If someone needs help, you help them. No excuses, no exceptions." "That code saved my life," Voss observed. They walked in silence for a while, following a trail that led into the forest surrounding the facility. Kiana had walked this same trail hundreds of times as a child, learning to identify animal tracks and red weather signs. Now she walked it as an adult whose expertise was being institutionalized at the highest levels of military training. "I need to tell you something," Kiana said finally. "Being here, seeing this facility dedicated to my father's memory, it makes me realize how important it is that what we are building at Quantico succeeds. Not just for the Marines we will train, but because it is the right way to honor what he taught me. Using skills to save lives, teaching others to do the same, creating a legacy that outlives us. That is exactly what we are going to do," Voss said with quiet intensity. "The institutional framework we are building will ensure this program becomes permanent Marine Corps doctrine. Your father's techniques will be taught at every mountain warfare center, every survival school, integrated into every tactical curriculum. That is how we honor his legacy." "What if I am not good enough for this?" Kiana said, voicing the fear she had been carrying. "What if the program worked at Bridgeport because of unique circumstances, but fails when we try to scale it up? What if I let down everyone who is counting on me?" Voss stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Kiana, you tracked me through a blizzard in some of the most dangerous terrain in California. You built a program from nothing that changed military culture around mental health. You train Marines who have already saved lives using your techniques. You are more than good enough. The question is whether you believe that yourself." "I'm trying to," Kiana admitted. "But standing here, in the place where my father did his work for so many years, I feel the weight of it. The responsibility to get this right." "Good," Voss said. "That weight keeps you honest, keeps you striving for excellence. But do not let it make you doubt what you have already proven. You belong in this fight, Kiana. You earned your place through skill and courage, and no amount of imposter syndrome changes that fact." They continued walking until they reached a clearing where Kiana's father had often brought her to practice tracking. She knelt and touched the ground, feeling the familiar texture of Alaska soil beneath her fingers. He would be proud of you. Kiana's mother's voice came from behind them. Both women turned to see her approaching, having followed them into the forest. Your father always said you had the gift, Kiana. He said you saw things other people missed, understood patterns other people ignored. He would be thrilled that you're teaching Marines those skills. Mom, Kiana said, standing to embrace her mother. I miss him so much. I know, sweetheart, her mother replied, holding her tight. But he lives on in you, in what you teach, in the lives you save. That is what he would want. Not grief, but action. Not sadness, but purpose. That evening, the SAR team hosted a dinner at a local restaurant where they shared stories about Thomas Tavai late into the night. Voss sat beside Kiana, listening to tales of her father's exploits and occasionally catching her eye with expressions of understanding and support. Later, walking back to their hotel through the cold Alaska night, Voss spoke quietly. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Meeting the people your father taught, seeing where you learned your skills, it helps me understand who you are at a deeper level. I'm glad you came, Kiana said honestly. Having you here made it easier somehow. Made it feel less like mourning and more like celebrating. They reached the hotel and paused in the lobby, neither quite ready to say goodnight. The next morning they would fly back to California to finish preparations for the move to Quantico. The transition to headquarters duty would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Ethan, Kiana said softly, when we get to Quantico, when we start building the institutional program, I want you to know that I'm all in. Not just professionally, but personally. Whatever we need to navigate regarding regulations and professional boundaries, we will figure it out together. Voss's expression showed relief and something deeper. I was hoping you would say that, because I cannot imagine doing this without you. Not the program, not the mission, not any of it. Then we do it together, Kiana said. Just like everything else since the canyon. Just like everything else, Voss agreed. They stood together in the quiet hotel lobby, two people who had found each other through crisis and built something meaningful from chaos. Alaska surrounded them with its wild beauty and harsh truths, the landscape that had shaped Kiana and given her the tools to save lives. Tomorrow they would leave this place and step into a larger mission with higher stakes and greater responsibility. But tonight they allowed themselves this moment of connection and promise. The trail ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles both professional and personal. But they would walk it together, reading the signs and trusting their judgment, just as Thomas Tavai had taught his daughter to do all those years ago in these very mountains. The dedication ceremony had honored a legacy, but the real honoring would come in the work ahead, in the lives saved, and the culture changed by the program they were building. That was the immortality that mattered, the kind that rippled outward through generations, teaching people to find what was lost and save what could be saved. Kiana carried her father's lessons in her bones and blood, in every skill she taught and every tracker she trained. And now, with Voss beside her and an entire corps ready to learn, she would carry those lessons further than Thomas Tavai could have imagined, into a future bright with possibility and purpose. 6 weeks after arriving at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Kiana stood in a pristine conference room presenting the Integrated Wilderness Survival and Tactical Readiness Program to a room full of generals, colonels, and senior enlisted leaders from across the Marine Corps. Major Ethan Voss sat at the front table beside Brigadier General Reeves, his new rank insignia gleaming on his uniform. The weight of institutional scrutiny was palpable, but Kiana had learned to channel pressure into focus. The program has now been implemented at all 3 mountain warfare training centers with a 97% completion rate and overwhelmingly positive student feedback, Kiana explained, clicking through slides that showed data, testimonials, and measurable outcomes. More significantly, we have documented 12 instances where graduates have successfully applied tracking techniques in real-world search and rescue operations, resulting in 11 lives saved and 1 successful recovery of remains for family closure. A colonel from Training and Education Command raised his hand. Hospital Corpsman Tavai, can you speak to the mental health component? What evidence do we have that integrating psychological resilience training actually improves combat readiness? Kiana had anticipated this question and pulled up the relevant data. Since program implementation, we have seen a 43% increase in voluntary mental health consultations among program graduates compared to control groups. More importantly, those seeking help are doing so earlier, before symptoms become severe enough to impact performance. We are also seeing improved unit cohesion scores and reduced disciplinary incidents in units where multiple members have completed the training. The presentation lasted 90 minutes, with Kiana and Voss fielding questions about everything from budget requirements to scalability challenges. By the time they finished, the senior leadership had approved full implementation across all Marine Corps training pipelines, with additional funding for instructor development and curriculum expansion. As the room emptied, General Reeves approached them with a satisfied expression. "Outstanding work, both of you. The Commandant is personally endorsing this program. Major Voss, you have done something remarkable here. And Petty Officer Devine, I have recommended you for advancement to Chief Petty Officer. Your expertise and leadership warrants senior enlisted recognition." Kiana felt the words settle over her like an unexpected blessing. Chief Petty Officer meant joining the senior enlisted ranks, meant recognition not just for what she had accomplished, but for her potential to lead at higher levels. "Thank you, ma'am," Kiana managed. "I am honored." After the general departed, Kiana and Voss gathered their materials in silence, both processing the magnitude of what had just happened. They had taken a program born in crisis and transformed it into Marine Corps doctrine. Lives would be saved, culture would shift, and the ripple effects would extend far beyond anything they could directly measure. "Walk with me," Voss said quietly once they were alone in the hallway. They walked through the headquarters building and out onto the grounds of Quantico, following a path that led toward the wooded training areas. It was late afternoon in early spring, the Virginia landscape just beginning to show green after winter's gray. "We did it," Voss said once they were away from buildings and people. "Everything we set out to accomplish. The program is permanent, it is expanding, and it is already saving lives. Your father would be proud," Voss added, glancing at Kiana. "You took what he taught you and scaled it to institutional impact. That is legacy building at the highest level." "I keep thinking about Staff Sergeant Thompson," Kiana said, "about how close he came to never seeking help, to potentially becoming another suicide statistic. Now he is an instructor himself, teaching other Marines that asking for help is tactical intelligence. That is what this was all about." They reached a small clearing surrounded by trees, a quiet space where the sounds of the base faded into background noise. Voss turned to face Kiana directly, his expression serious but warm. "Kiana, we need to talk about us. About what happens next with the personal side of this partnership. We have been navigating professional boundaries for weeks, maintaining appropriate distance in public, but I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is just professional respect." "I know," Kiana said. "I feel the same way. But the regulations are still there, Ethan. Officer-enlisted relationships are prohibited for good reasons. Which is why I spoke with the staff judge advocate yesterday," Voss said, pulling out a folder from his jacket. "There is a process for requesting an exception to fraternization policy when a professional relationship existed prior to any personal relationship, and when both parties can demonstrate that the personal relationship will not compromise military discipline or mission effectiveness." "You researched this," Kiana said, surprised and touched. "I researched everything," Voss replied. "The regulations, the precedents, the process. It is not easy and there is no guarantee of approval, but it is possible. We would need to submit formal requests through our chains of command, undergo evaluation by a review board, and accept whatever restrictions they impose to prevent conflicts of interest." "What if they deny it?" Kiana asked. "Then we maintain professional boundaries until one of us separates from service or circumstances change," Voss said honestly. "I will not ask you to risk your career or compromise the program we have built. But I wanted you to know that I am willing to go through the official process, to be completely transparent about what exists between us, because I believe what we have is worth fighting for within the system." Kiana looked at this man who had transformed from skeptic to partner to something deeper. He was willing to navigate bureaucracy, face potential career consequences, and operate with complete transparency because he valued what they had built together. That kind of integrity deserved equal honesty. "I want to try," Kiana said. "I want to do this the right way, through proper channels, with full transparency. If they approve it, we move forward together. If they deny it, we accept that and remain professional partners. Either way, we do not hide or compromise what we have accomplished." Voss's face showed relief and something like joy. "Then we submit the paperwork together. As a team, just like everything else." They stood together in the clearing, two people who had saved each other's lives and built something meaningful from crisis. The path forward was uncertain, complicated by regulations and scrutiny and the weight of institutional expectations. But they had faced harder challenges and emerged stronger. That evening, Kiana sat in her quarters writing an email to her mother in Alaska. She described the successful presentation, the program expansion, the recognition of her father's legacy through the work she was doing. She mentioned that she and Major Voss were pursuing an official relationship through proper channels, knowing her mother would understand the significance and complexity. Her mother's response came quickly. "Your father used to say that the right path is rarely the easy path, but it is always worth walking. I am proud of you, Kiana, for your courage, your integrity, and your willingness to fight for what matters through proper channels rather than taking shortcuts." The next morning, Kiana received notification that she had been selected for the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for her actions during Captain Voss's rescue. The formal ceremony would take place in 2 weeks, with General Reeves presenting the award. Lieutenant Okafor and Corporal Salazar had submitted statements supporting the recommendation, describing in detail how her tracking skills and determination had saved a life. Voss found her reading the notification and smiled. "Told you that you would be recognized. You earned every bit of that medal." "We earned it," Kiana corrected. "The program, the recognition, all of it happened because we worked together." "True," Voss acknowledged. "But you were the one who had the courage to trust yourself when everyone else doubted. That started everything." 2 weeks later, Kiana stood at attention in her dress uniform as Brigadier General Reeves pinned the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal to her chest. The citation read in part, "For exceptional initiative and expert application of wilderness tracking techniques that directly resulted in the successful rescue of a missing Marine officer under hazardous conditions." Her actions demonstrated courage, technical proficiency, and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment. After the ceremony, there was a small reception where colleagues and friends congratulated her. Staff Sergeant Thompson had flown in from California specifically to attend, along with several other graduates of the pilot program. They surrounded Kiana with gratitude and respect, thanking her for changing their lives and giving them tools they had not known they needed. As the reception wound down and people began departing, Voss approached with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To tracking what matters," Kiana replied, touching her glass to his, "and having the courage to follow the trail wherever it leads." They stood together, looking out the window at the Quantico training grounds, where the next generation of Marines would learn the skills that had saved Voss's life and launched their partnership. The program would continue growing, reaching more students, saving more lives, changing military culture one tracker at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you have had a similar situation where trusting your judgment against all odds made a difference. We love hearing from you. Kiana thought about the storm that had started everything, the blizzard in the Sierra Nevada mountains that had nearly claimed a life and instead had revealed purpose. She thought about her father's teachings, about tracking and reading sign and understanding that every story leaves evidence if you know where to look. The trail from that frozen canyon to this moment had been winding and challenging, marked by doubt and determination, crisis and growth. But she had followed it with the same certainty she had brought to finding Voss, trusting her judgment even when others questioned it, believing in possibilities that others dismissed. Now she stood with a medal on her chest, a promotion pending, a program that would outlive her spreading across the Marine Corps, and a partner beside her who understood that some things were worth the complicated navigation through regulations and scrutiny. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but bright, full of missions to accomplish and lives to save and lessons to teach. Kiana Tavai had found her place not by seeking permission, but by proving herself through action. She had honored her father's legacy by taking his teachings further than he could have imagined. And she had discovered that sometimes the greatest courage was not in the dramatic rescue, but in the daily choice to trust yourself, help others, and walk the right path regardless of who doubted you. The storm had passed. The trail continued, and Kiana walked it with confidence earned through fire and ice, knowing that she belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right person walking beside her.